Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Workplace Design and Useful Technology to Optimise Employee Experience. Now we have three fantastic guests joining us for a live panel discussion today, and the area of focus will definitely be the new hybrid work environment. More specifically, we'll be covering why focusing on an alignment of culture before workspace design or technology is key. What are the new expectations employees have of physical and digital workspace? How can we reinvigorate employees through workspace design and technologies to get business back on track and firing again? Then we'll cover hybrid workspace design and technologies. So how can we bridge the physical and digital worlds? What's working and what's not? All right, so without further ado, let me introduce the guests and then we'll go ahead and get stuck in. Guest number one, Domino Risch, Principal at Hassell. Domino is one of Australia's most highly regarded and trusted workplace designers. Passionate about the future of work, she excels at leading clients and design teams through workplace projects that are fundamentally aligned with organisational, cultural, strategic and future-focused business objectives. She enjoys deeply collaborative and engaged partnerships with her clients and collaborators. Welcome, Domino.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Next up, we have Max Davies, Director of UC and Enterprise ANZ at Crestron. In the past, Max occupied critical design and advisory positions, shaping the modern technology consulting and implementation industries into its current modern identity. A mature and respected field that is responsible for some of the highest value contracts in the construction and IT industries. Now at Crestron, Max is currently working with key corporate and enterprise clients on some of the largest technology projects globally. Welcome to you, Max.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And thirdly, rounding out the panel, Simon Backhouse, Director of Business Development Australia and New Zealand at JLL Technologies. Simon has an extensive background in workplace technology, including solutions engineering, consulting, technical designs and project management and implementation. Recently launching into the world of corporate real estate with JLL, he brings with him a unique ability to discuss how technology is helping businesses achieve a reduction in their real estate footprint while also enhancing employee engagement and experience. And a welcome to you, Simon.
Thanks for the invitation. Really lovely to join you all.
So that is a fantastic lineup. My name is David Alara from Konnectus. I'll be moderating the discussions today, and with me is Jonathan Cuthbertson, our technology lead at Konnectus. He'll be managing all of your questions and comments so that we can make this hour as interactive and valuable as possible. Just for those of you that are not familiar with Konnectus, we're a specialist audiovisual and technology consultancy working predominantly with medium to large organisations in many different sectors. About 70% of our work is actually in modern workspace. Our focus is on easy to use solutions that are highly reliable and relevant to your business. Now there's some quick housekeeping which we'll just run through. We'd really like you to get involved in the discussion today. Use the chat for your questions and comments along the way. We'll be stopping periodically to answer those and get some feedback from the panel. There'll also be a longer Q&A session at the end. Also, feel free to use the team reactions and make it a little bit fun. And lastly, the recording is going to be made available to you. So all of you here today will be able to get a copy of that and also share it with other people that could get something out of the discussions today. All right, with that all taken care of, let's get stuck in and dive into topic one. So a very smart lady shared these 3 steps with me and they really resonated with me. In our consulting work, we know how important it is to be very clear and understanding a client's core requirements, before looking at any technology solutions. So the steps she shared with me were: step 1, first, work on defining the right culture for the organisation. Step 2, work on implementing the culture and getting the organisation aligned with it, and the people especially. And step 3 is to lastly, build the spaces, infrastructure and technology then to support that agreed culture for the people. So it'd be great to get, commentary and thoughts on that topic, on those 3 steps. We might start off with you, Domino, if that's okay.
Of course. Look, I really feel very passionately about this one. I'm often asked as a workplace designer, what drives our ideas, where does our creativity come from, and the responses that we provide with our clients, where do they come from? And I have to say that, if we were just designing space in a vacuum, I think maybe things would look a little bit different. But what we always do, and what's actually more important than in some ways what the space is as a kind of a question in a vacuum, is how does it relate to the organisation we're designing to? And I know that there's a lot of designers out there who maybe won't like me saying this, but I think you have to get the culture right first, or the aspiration for the culture. And then you start to implement behaviours, and that should then lead to a space approach, or a space design, or even a strategic direction for your workplace that suits those aspirations. I think if you start with space and expect behaviours to change, leadership attitudes to change, protocols of use to change, it's not the strongest of foundations. So I love talking about organisational culture, organisational strategy, organisational drivers and purpose, because for me, that's what anchors what I do in reality. If it wasn't for that, things would be a little bit of a house of cards for me.
Do you have like a process that you follow, to walk a client through those steps, doing them in the right order?
It's a really good... Yeah, it's a really, really good question. The one thing you'll probably hear me say a few times today is that I do believe one size doesn't fit all. And I think that that's a phrase that can cover a multitude of different areas in what we're about to talk about. I think there are some pretty basic fundamentals, though. I think the organisation has to have a vision of what they're trying to achieve. Whether or not that's transforming themselves from being transactional to collaborative, whether or not it's transforming cultural approaches to diversity and acceptance and a broader church internally, whether or not it's driven by what the market and organisational that we work for, what their clients are asking for, and all sorts of other external influences, let alone, the economy and COVID. Like, we don't even have to talk about that. All of these drivers really affect what is possible and what the appetite for change is in an organisation. And I think in terms of process, what you have to do is you have to talk. My kids laugh at me after having heard me work from home for the last 18 months, pretty much. It's like, all you do is talk, which they're kind of right. I'm probably writing emails at the same time I'm talking. Shh, don't tell anyone. But, it's actually really important for designers to be communicators. And I mean that in a two-way sense. Not only is it incumbent on us as designers to communicate the design that we're proposing and use language that isn't necessarily what I call design babble, that only other designers understand, but it's absolutely fundamental for us to actually be able to listen in the opposite direction to what our clients are saying. And they're not designers, and they're often using, let's just call it corporate babble, that designers aren't necessarily immersed in or used to or expert at. And so I sit in that sort of weird sort of grey zone between the two, where one of the biggest parts of my job is literally translating between different parts of the organisation, our side, their side, services consultant sides, and trying to get that sense of clarity of purpose for everybody involved.
So now more than ever, I suppose, with hybrid environments being top of mind for so many organisations, I think a lot of people, perhaps on this call, are struggling to understand what that means culturally. Is it status quo, same as what it was before COVID, or have there been some changes? What are some trends that you're seeing, or maybe you've got some examples you might be able to share? You don't have to mention names, but I think it would be useful for the listeners to understand, what's changing and how culture maybe needs to be addressed, for this new hybrid environment.
Well, it's such a good question. And, you know, I spend a large portion of my daylight hours thinking, well, and let's face it, nighttime hours thinking about this stuff. I think the first thing that I'd like to communicate to everybody on the call is that designers are problem solvers. So COVID has just chucked another problem at us that is there to be solved. I don't see COVID as being, you know, turning everything that we've ever known in terms of why you would have a workplace, or even the fundamental relevance of having a place where your organisation can come together at the same time and the same place. I don't think that changes it. And, you know, there's any number of headlines I can quote from the Fin in the last 18 months about, you know, workplaces being, you know, the cruise ships of, you know, of COVID because of, you know, their capacity to spread the virus. But I think at a more basic psychological level, humans need to build connections with each other. That's what we do. That's how we've evolved to cooperate in groups and how work happens. There'd be almost nobody on this call, I would say, statistically, that spends the majority of their time working on their own without input from others. We collaborate, all of us, in our industry and almost all others. We must work with others to get our own work done. And so what COVID has done is it simply accelerated a number of trends that were already happening anyway. Workplace never stands still. You know I can see a number of designers that I've worked with and that I've collaborated with are on the call. I think you'd all be nodding your heads. In Australia, we have a particularly well-developed, sophisticated workplace ecology where we've got great design firms, great designers, great clients who are, you know, prepared to listen to often new innovative ideas from their designers. But the progress because of that we've made in Australia, as opposed to some other parts of the world, has been really, really very good over the last, let's say, 20 years. And there's been some landmark projects along the way that have really put some flags in the sand. But what COVID has done is it's taken that curve, turned it into a hockey stick, and it's really going to start, the famous hockey stick, it's going to start to accelerate some of the things that were already happening anyway. So I occasionally talk about the deskless office. I don't mean that we're never going to have another workstation ever again. What I mean is that 20 years ago, the ratio of desks that one person would work at, whether it's in an office or out in the open, doesn't really matter, versus collaborative furniture, whether it's in a meeting room or out in the open, that ratio was maybe 25% collaborative, 75% individual. 10 years ago, maybe, in Australia, we were at a 50-50. There are as many meeting chairs as there were desk chairs. And what I see is the complete flip happening, where we're going to see very many more facilities for collaboration as opposed to solo individual work. And that's because what a workplace needs to turn into and transform itself to now, partially because of COVID, but partially because it was going to anyway, is that we need a physical place to replace what we can't do on Zoom. We can't read body language as well. We can't form actual physical bonds. Neurochemical bonds with people only come when you're in person. You can't do it over Zoom. Build empathy with groups, build social capital, build social networks. And that's what Workplace will need to respond to and start to prioritise. And so the last thing I'll say before I hand over is, you know, we've all learned about working from home, WFH. There's now working from work, which if you're lucky to work from work, that's a thing now. Work from work is a thing. We're going to also see not working from work, because I think what we're going to start to see is this idea of when you're at work, you're being purely productive, whether or not it's you're working on a spreadsheet or you're doing something that advances work product. I think what we're going to start to see is the really savvy employers are going to find ways of encouraging people, creating magnetic workplaces that people want to come to so that they can be together, because an organisation is nothing without its people. So not work from work will be a thing. I'm predicting it.
All right, it's interesting, those transitions, those significant transitions. The hockey stick, I love that that little analogy. Is something you can really visualise. So Max, what are your thoughts on this one, mate?
I'm so pleased that we agree on so many of these elements, and the fact that they are so consistent across the space planning journey, but also the technology planning journey, because this is exactly what we're seeing out there as well. You know, the move to hybrid work, I think, to echo your point, Domino, was that the fact that we were already doing this anyway. You know, in your space and in our space, we were doing this already. You know, most of our clients were trying to figure out how to minimise the cost of meeting space and office space, how to make things more reliable, more consistent, and all those type of things. You know, we had a real cost of training and familiarisation. We had challenges about ownership of technology and all these type of things that were really just sort of kind of symptoms of people just putting in random office spaces that weren't really being thought about the culture as how they work. What hybrid is doing is it's focusing people on what's important about the meeting experience and the collaboration experience, which is really, it's great news for everybody, because we've had this fantastic perfect storm happening as well, because in the past couple of years we've also seen the rise in video collaboration with Teams and Zoom, and that's influenced the design of workspaces, because now all of a sudden every desk is a meeting room. So then ergo every home is a meeting room. And now what we're trying to do is trying to balance that experience so that your home meeting experience is the same as your at work meeting experience. A wonderful technology leader we're dealing with in one of large financial organisations once walked me into a large boardroom post-COVID, and we sort of walked in. He designed it during COVID. He delivered it during COVID, spent a fortune in this boardroom, and walked in and went, "Look at this room. It's amazing. It's totally useless to me now." Because the people at home have a better experience in a meeting than they do in this boardroom. They have to talk to this room. So there's a lot of work going on to try and realign that experience so that people have that good experience when they go to work. Echoing the comments as well, work is a place to meet and home is a place to work. That's the type of things that we're hearing as well. A lot of clients want to go into work to meet. They want to engage with their client, firstly their clients, personally as well, with their other colleagues. But they want to bring back that personal interaction. You know, the best collaboration device, despite the fact that I sell technology, is a table, and having people the other side of that table. It's a really, really good way to collaborate. And yeah, the culture. Look, the culture drives the change, and it drives the acceptance of technology. We need the culture to be right. I'll give you a wonderful example we always use about room scheduling panels. You know, loved or hated or indifferent to it to a lot of interior designers, but ubiquitous now, as we see everywhere, because a lot of people are using them. They weren't initially accepted because a lot of the culture in the organizations initially wouldn't be told that a panel outside the room meant you had that room or not. But when you instill a culture that whoever books that room has the room, that they can use that room until they're finished with it, and people have to plan around that, and that the CEO has as much right to a room as the junior in accounts, that really does start leveling the playing field and actually encourages collaboration and improves the employee experience. So yeah, it's a great place for us to be. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I mean, Simon, you've probably got a view. I mean, it'd be great to hear what you have to say. Of course, the technology for different cultures can work in different ways, can't it? I mean, you know, something like a Google might have a completely different culture to a traditional law firm, and therefore the technology required to support those different cultures needs to be vastly different. That's just an example I thought of, but you've probably got a lot more insight. It'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, David. I think every employee has an opinion about the culture of the workplaces that they've been to, and also certainly the ones that they spend their days a part of. So, you know, hopefully there's a lot of comfort with the listeners that are on the call today about what it means now for this hybrid working place to have people both in the office and working from home. But there's still a lot of uncertainty about what having people work from home means to culture, right? And, you know, looking through the lens of technology, I think certainly for the listeners from connectors who perhaps define technology more specifically than broadly, if we define technology by any piece of software or hardware, widget, whatever it happens to be, to assist solve a problem, you know, I think it's important to consider technology that helps gain insights into how people are feeling at home, right? because we're going to be entering into a brave new world of not having the reach into the people who may be struggling from home. And technologies like apps, and maybe there are some people on the call who are laughing because I've been banging on about workplace apps for the last few years. But now they're sort of becoming mainstay because they're, we've got these little supercomputers in our pocket that have such a reach into our, personal space as we move through our day. So leveraging technologies like something as simple as a mobile phone is great because you can interact with people and provide feedback on your mental health, about, providing some feedback about technical challenges, all the things that help us be productive, get from the start of our day to the end.
I was talking to some neuropsychologists who operate in the workplace realm a few weeks ago, and one of the things that really struck me about what they said, building on your comment there, Simon, was that the pandemic at the moment is not necessarily COVID. It's what they're calling an empathy deficit that's going to start to arise because without that, as I was mentioning before, without the chemicals in the brain that reinforce your sense of connection to both individuals and organisations, what's going to start to happen is your ability as a human to empathise with the person on the end of the Zoom call, because that's the only thing that we've got for many of us in lockdown at the moment. Your ability to empathise with another is going to slowly start to wither away. And the only antidote is face-to-face. The only antidote is to get back together. And I know that that's really hard for some of us to contemplate at the moment, but it's going to be a massive, massive implication on the psychology of going to work, the psychology of a workplace, the psychology of how people feel connected to each other and that sense of being part of a tribe or a gang culturally. That is one thing that out of COVID, we're always asked, okay, so what's the spatial implication? Tell me how many Zoom rooms I'm going to need now. Tell me, how much immersive space am I going to need in my meeting rooms? It's almost, there's a fundamental question before you get to that, which is about organisationally, how are we going to restructure our culture? How are we going to think about leadership? How are we going to prioritise those interpersonal skills? And maybe empathy deficits are high on the list for some people already. How are we going to make sure that what we're living through at the moment we learn from, that we improve from, and that we improve the experience of work, which is kind of why I get out of bed every day. It's not just the workplace, but the experience of work, to make it a really positive thing, that we actually can make it better because of COVID. Because I actually think that this is one of the best things that's happened to our industry in terms of picking it up by the scruff of its neck and shaking it round a bit and kicking it down the hill a little bit further than it has been for a while. So, silver linings.
Well, that's a good point. Disruption's not always a bad thing, is it? It can. I mean, definitely we were disrupted in a huge way last year. We were all forced to change, forced to jump on Zoom, jump on Teams, jump on WebEx, and there was a lot of pressure and stress, and we kind of got through that. And now there's a whole different way of looking at it. We have that opportunity to, sit back, evaluate, plan a little bit more. Have these deeper conversations, a bit deeper thinking, like you're talking about, Domino, about, this is here to stay. It's not going away. There's been some good things come out of it. How can we optimise and really think about meaningful change moving forward?
That's right. We're seeing, I was just going to say, there's a study I read the other day that the hybrid work implementation, the success thereof is actually seen to be critical to the hiring policy and the attractor of talent in organisations now as well. This is a massive thing, giving people the freedoms, but also an organisation having a view on it, having a plan, because unfortunately people are feeling a bit lost at the moment. So if the organisation that they work for doesn't have a plan, you'll lose those people, and they'll go somewhere else, to somewhere that has a plan. And that's across everything that we do, and all of those decisions feed into the place, the technology, and the culture, and that's so important for our collective industry.
Yeah, I was going to add to that some industries and some sectors of different types of workplaces and work are better set up for that conversation at the beginning of COVID than others, and we're seeing some of the highest rates of transformation, cultural transformation, happening in the places you might least have expected them to. Just to single out one, professional services and law, for example, one of the last bastions of private individual workspace with a door on it, right? But what we're seeing in terms of leaps forward compared to some of the, maybe our big financial institutions that are already agile, have already got really great collaborative workspace, they need a little tweak. But when you're starting down here, your level of change journey is extraordinary. And so it's really encouraging to see conversations not just about workplace. And this is why I started, David, your original question is you can't start with space. The spatial response is the answer to a whole bunch of questions that you must ask yourself as an organisation first. You can't just start with, okay, let's define the space and hope that everything else falls in around it. It is the answer, not the question.
So before we just move on to the next topic, to change gears, that's a great point. So for people listening, to try and work on answering some of those questions, it's always great to talk to professionals. What are some examples of professionals? Are there specific organisations? Is it companies like yours, Domino, at Hassell, or is it more of a niche expertise? Workplace experts. Maybe you could provide just a 30-second insight into that. I'm not sure.
Oh, well, without wanting to plug Hassell, I mean, there are in Australia, there are some absolutely wonderful workplace strategists, and I would count our own dedicated workplace strategy team as part of that group. But there are alternatives for people out there, and that's absolutely fine. I think the most important thing is actually having that conversation, and it's not just about starting to say, well, okay, I need someone to come in and convert these workstations into project rooms. I think that's probably not the right place to start. The right place to start is a kind of a belt and brace understanding of what's the purpose of the organisation, what is the work that our people do. Let's actually have a look at it. And that in itself is not a new question that we've had to deal with. We've had to deal with personas and work styles for a very long time. But I think the thing that is new a little bit that any workplace strategy or even a workplace designer who is interested in this kind of stuff will be asking is, what are the preferences of your people now? We need to actually start to take into account the driver of the individual choice, because in survey after survey around the world, you'll find the same basic answer, which is that 60% of people want to work from somewhere other than the office between 40 and 60% of the time. And so the finance gurus in an office or in an organisation will say, okay, we're going to strip 60% of the space out because none of you are coming back at the same time, and we'll just do this big jigsaw puzzle, and you'll have to book a desk, and if you all turn up at the same time, well, then that won't happen. It's not as simple as that. I actually think the space inside that's left needs to transform, maybe less desks, maybe more collaborative space, more enclosed, more immersive space. But the experience of the hybrid is where this gets really challenging, right? Because no matter who's at home or anywhere else for that matter, on the back of a boat or under a tree versus who's in an office, that experience is starting to become a little bit unequal. And the idea of when we're all locked away in our houses and everybody's a single postage stamp size thing on their Teams screen or their Zoom screen or whatever it might be, that's okay. It's the democratic situation you were talking about, Max, of being able to book a meeting room equally. It's entirely different when you've got 19 people in a boardroom and one person at home, or conversely, one person in a boardroom and 19 people on Zoom. That experience is going to be really, really different. And that's, I think, where technology is going to start to play an enormous role, not only in the apps and the sort of the digital building experience and the idea of how you can get the most out of your experience of coming to work, but the immersive technology, having a screen for the virtual, a screen for the content, and a screen for the digital whiteboarding in meeting rooms and spaces like that, it's going to become really, really important to get that technology balance right, to get a more equitable experience digitally.
Yeah, that is a very good point, and I'm going to ask all of you to comment on that in a lot more detail shortly. So just before we move on, though, we do have a little technical issue with the chat in this Teams webinar. So plan B, what we can do, because we do want to make this interactive. So for all of you listening, if you could alternatively just email any questions or comments you have, to connect us, well, contact us. So contact us all together, lowercase, at konnectus.com.au. That's KONNECTUS.com.au. Contact us at konnectus.com.au. Bit of a mouthful, but if you, yes, that's exactly right. And if you send your emails there, Jonathan is able to facilitate those immediately, and then he'll chat to me, and then I'll bring them up, and we'll be able to get some interaction going here with the panel and get those questions answered. So sorry for the little hiccup, but there's a plan B. We should be able to get that sorted if you just use good old email.
Technology.
All right. Moving on. So topic 2, let's talk about, the new employee, and we might have touched on this a little bit, the new employee expectations for the office now and moving forward. So I'd ask you, to provide maybe 2 examples of what customers are regularly asking you for at the moment. Why are they asking for these things, and why are they important to those specific customers? You don't have to mention the customer's name if it's not, if you don't want to, of course. And then also, what impacts this is going to have, for those specific customers. So really, we're looking for some real-world examples that each of you are kind of working on, with specific customers. I think that would be extremely useful for the listeners to kind of get into your worlds and understand what's really happening out there, if you don't mind. So we might get you, Max, this time to kick this one off.
Cool. I think the big one is that we're in a place at the moment where a lot of technology, the basis for a lot of the technology briefs that we're seeing, and you would see the same, David, in your organisation, is that we as an organisation X have decided to go to Teams or Zoom. Therefore, this is the path we're going forward with. This has been certainly in the case of Microsoft, we see a lot of this, and we're very proud to say that in our organisation, 35% of every Microsoft device that's appeared on a desk in the ANZ region has been a Crestron device, and we're very proud of our success in that space. But that's largely been driven by the fact that people have decided to move en masse to these online and web and cloud-based collaboration tools, because that's what they want to use, and they're seeing the benefits. And by the way, this was happening long before COVID, of course. You look at the collectively the thousands of rooms that we've implemented, David and Jonathan. It's as part of the projects that you've done. Organisations were already on that path and trying to do that. Now, the interesting thing about that, though, is it's very, very difficult to forklift upgrade somebody from platform A to platform B, because typically they're not going from going straight to a platform, and they don't quite know how to get there. So what we do see a lot is challenges around how do we transition, how do we move, what kind of tools can we use around those transitional elements, going from something to, say, Teams or Zoom. And consequently, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace around how that's achieved. Pretty much every organisation we're talking to is undergoing that at the moment, I would say, without exception. And even those organisations who are fairly mature in their transitional journey to get to Teams or Zoom are still exploring what that means and what it means to actually own it and to live it. We often talk about, I often do presentations about architecting ownership, for example. It's one thing to design, it's one thing to implement. But the thing that kind of gets forgotten about is, how do you make sure it works? How do those things, are they reliable? Do they always work for you? How do you scale them en masse? How do you grow that standard and those type of things? And that is without doubt the loudest voice that we hear in the industry at the moment around the challenges around this. Now, it's been accelerated to such a degree because of COVID. If you look at most of the organisations that we worked with before COVID hit, that some of them were on the Teams or Zoom journey and some of them weren't. But what we saw was when organisations came back to work, and all these large corporations wanted them to come back to work because they're paying good money for these offices. they had that awful moment of walking into the room and going, oh crap, we don't have the tools to collaborate in the office. And that has then sort of signaled this sort of feeding frenzy of trying to get these spaces up to scratch and getting people back to work. And it's been so interesting to watch. It's sometimes been entertaining, sometimes funny, and sometimes very, very frustrating to watch organizations try to deal with that kind of change very, very quickly. But that's had its challenges across the board. But thankfully, I feel like we're in a good place now. Things are getting to the place where people know what they want to do. They know the direction they want to head. And what's come of that, if you like, these were the primal ingredients that built hybrid. These are all the things. These are all the elements that suddenly went, actually, we don't have an isolated problem here. We have all these elements that have kind of been put together, and what we as an industry gathered that together, stuck a label on it, and called it hybrid. And that's fundamentally, I don't want to make light of it, but that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve an efficient workplace based on the massive amount of change that we are experiencing in the world today. So a very long-winded answer and probably more than 2 points, but that is definitely what we're seeing.
What I'd like to dig a little deeper there, Max. What, you talked about, I guess, a company or organisation trying to maybe standardise or agree on one platform. I think you mentioned there.
Yeah.
I mean, is that really an easy thing to do? Because I also get that as does John, we get that same kind of request time and time again. But they say, oh, but we also want to be able to connect with these people on a different platform, etc. So, I mean, how are you solving that?
It's an interesting thing, because a lot of the times these decisions are made from up top. There is normally a very senior person in an organisation who's normally got a C title, who waves his hand around and says, right, we need to make a change. Let's go and buy 1,000 licenses of blah blah, and let's go and roll it out. And then we'll walk out the room thinking that he solved the problem. The reality is that the implementation of that change is never quite as simple as it is. We're seeing the rise in, from our part, we're seeing the rise in, for example, things like bring your own device, bring your own codec type of technologies, because that enables you to bring anything you want into the room. Even though you might have a standard Teams or Zoom room there, you can bring a laptop in and you can do any kind of meeting you want. We're seeing professional services firms, builders, and a lot of outwardly facing organizations, service type organizations who need that type of functionality. We were talking to a building consultancy firm recently who said, we can't just standardize on Teams, because every client we work with has a different platform that they want to work with. So
right.
We need flexibility.
That's probably a common issue.
It is, absolutely. And there are many people trying to solve that problem. You've got your Pexips, you've got your Ciscos, you've got your Polycoms and various other people trying to do it in software. You've got us and many others trying to do it with hardware. We are in a transitional period now where people are trying to understand what it is that they're going to finally settle on. And there are several different pillars of collaboration at the moment. You've got various organizations are trying to offer their services, Cisco, Zoom, Teams, etc. So that's definitely the noise out in the industry at the moment. There are ways to solve it, but often we're plotting the path to a resolution by giving them tools to help them through a medium to short term problem, is what we try and do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to interject. We've finally got some questions rolling in through email, which is great. Keep it up, everyone. Got one here from Kathy Jamison, who I'd just like to read out, and we'll see if we can get some viewpoints. She says, I'm interested in how your providers are pivoting to create more inclusive hybrid experiences without stitching a number of components together that exist now. The traditional camera at the end is not really cutting it. The cameras seem sophisticated, neat bars, etc., but it's still coming from a traditional viewpoint. Hybrid agile stand-ups, for example, is what she's asking about. Who'd like to talk to that one?
I'd really be interested to talk about your previous question, Dave. So perhaps Max is best positioned to answer this one.
I can certainly jump in from a manufacturer perspective, if that's okay. What I will say is that there are the realities of bringing products to market, and Kathy makes a very, very good point in that when something like COVID lands on us with zero warning, and also, might I add, stops the world making stuff as well, because as you're probably aware, we're in the middle of a chip shortage and all sorts of stuff being caused by COVID, which I'm sure is impacting your everyday life. It's certainly impacting mine. There is a time to change. And so I think this really goes back to that point I'm making, to say that we have to design around scalable technologies that can be upgraded and could be, I hate to use the word future-proofed, but in order to plan for the future so that you can bring your organization up to speed in a controlled manner. Because the challenge we also have here is that even if that magic box existed and I can give you that box that does everything you want to do, the cost of training your organization to get into that, to do it right now, and to modify your behavior to adapt to this magic piece of hardware that I can provide you that will solve all your problems, will probably cost more than the magic piece of hardware itself. So we have to make iterative steps, not least because nobody will thank us for bringing shiny new boxes out that don't work. They have to be reliable. We have to do slow iterative updates, and we have to ensure that we have the workforce behind us, and we have to have their endorsement going into these deployments to make sure that the technology doesn't fail because people don't want to use it. So there is a lot going on, and I can certainly tell you that the development cycle and the time to market is decreasing manyfold at the moment in a lot of organisations, including our own. So watch this space. There will be certainly more magic boxes to solve your problems.
Wow, that's quite the one-liner from Crestron there. Thank you very much, Max. Let's go to you, Simon, just on topic 2 here, and yeah, 2 examples of what customers are regularly asking you for at the moment.
Look, I can summarise it by sort of putting an umbrella over 2 and calling it 1, and that is BI, business intelligence. Everyone we speak to is looking for data to support decisions that they're trying to make but haven't got any data or rigor to support. And naturally, the biggest one is going to be, what does the future of our real estate look like? And when you've got a business where their second biggest cost is real estate, and you've got maybe 1,000 employees working out of one building, now 50% or even 60, 70% are working from home, there's a lot of questions that come up about what does the future of the built environment look like? So, when I talk about BI, I'm talking about how we can use existing platforms and perhaps new technologies to feed data into, ideally, a central reporting single pane of glass, as we say. But we're also talking about ways to capture that data. So 2 really topical pieces of technology, certainly post-COVID. Prior to COVID, were certainly still very sexy topics to talk about, but weren't commonplace. They weren't completely necessary to provide that insight that people now require and businesses require. So one of those is, sensors that can provide real-time tracking of the utilisation of an office space. And Domino, I'm sure this will resonate with you, but what we see a lot of the time is businesses who like to include sensors as part of a fit out, which is fine, but really it's important that we have those discussions prior to the fit out and even prior to the design process, so that understanding how we humans interact with our environment can actually feed the design process. So, firstly, there's capturing that data, but second of all, there is the reporting on that data. So, coming on board with JLL Technologies, there's an onus on us to be able to provide integrated solutions. And it's really important to talk about integration, because it takes us from a discussion about solving one problem to indeed solving an entire problem. And this goes a long way to informing the return to office discussions that we're all having. So, if a business can confidently run a report on, hey, those 6 or 8 person meeting rooms that were the flavour of the month 2-3 years ago are no longer being used, the question can be raised, and people like Domino and the workplace strategists and designers can say, well, let's start to look at how that space can better be utilised. But suffice to say, it all starts with that data. And the second thing is, and again, every conversation that we have is desk booking, you know, and it sort of feeds back to culture. And I'm a big fan of Leesman. And if the people on the call aren't familiar with Leesman, I certainly encourage you to jump online and check it out. But Leesman is a UK-based think tank who coined the phrase EWX, or Employee Workplace Experience. And they talk about, you know, the built environment, technology, and employee sentiment. So it's really important for businesses to understand what the sentiment is, and what we talk about there is how people feel about not only the workplace and the built environment that we're in, but also about coming to work. How do they feel about working for that business in the first place? So, you know, desk reservation, you know, might be a funny two things to try and join together, but I'll tie it back together by saying, if a business can provide the confidence to their employees through a desk reservation system or a mobile app that, hey, if I want to go into the office, not only is a desk going to be there waiting for me, but I've got visibility about who is going to be at the office and who I want to go in and collaborate with. So yeah, two very topical pieces of tech.
And making that simple and seamless is so key, isn't it, Simon? Because that can kind of make or break the whole concept. Kind of, you know, if an employee sort of thinks, oh, this is just all too hard, or, you know, like I've got to sort of figure out, you know, how to book, and then it might get cancelled on me, or someone else might sit there, or they seem like simple things, but when they're all added together, the employee experiences, which is what we're talking about here today, can be, you know, pretty abysmal, and just prevent people coming to the office at all, and that's got a major impact, obviously, on, you know, much greater things. So simple things there with the technology. I mean, has there been a big advancement in solutions in desk booking that make it seamless and easy, would you say?
It's a tricky one to answer, I think, David, because, you know, historically, I always like to say that historically it was the big tech giants that were leading the market. But here we are in this really unique time in history where, for the first time, it's actually the market leading the tech giants. So it's going to be interesting to see what technology changes occur in the next little while. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess the beauty of desk reservation solutions is that they're fundamentally built on software, and most of them are cloud-based, which means that as the technology changes and matures, you're not having to go and invest additional money to enjoy those upgrades and those changes. It sort of rolls out over the cloud. So yeah, we're at the very early stages of that technology. And ultimately, what we're talking about here is trying to forecast human behaviour, which is at the best of times is an impossible task. So I encourage people on the call to just start the process, discuss internally, have workshops about again that employee sentiment. How do your employees feel about it? And make sure you get the ones that are resistant in that call and give them a voice and help them sort of provide some invaluable feedback about what they want the future of the office to look like.
Absolutely. So Domino, top two things that people are asking you and your team about, what's top of mind? You may have already talked to them a little bit, but what are the top two?
Well, I reinforce everything that Max and Simon just said. Absolutely, they are pillars. I'll give you a slightly different spin. I'd use first the word authenticity, and you can interpret that multiple ways. You've got authentic ways of representing the organisation and the brand, which is fairly straightforward. Let's just say if you're a Google, you probably want to look like a Google. If you're a Baker McKenzie, you probably want to look like a Baker McKenzie. So that sense of aesthetic reflection and brand messaging that is embedded into the architecture of the space is really important. But I think you can take it a lot further than simple surface treatment. You can be authentically invested in the well-being of your people. You can create a much more biodiverse workplace that tries to blur the outside and the inside, provide planting, all of the sustainable agendas about materiality and so on and so forth. But I like to kind of summarize that by talking about beauty in space. I don't mean aesthetic beauty. I mean beauty in that it feels right and it feels good, and we are better humans for being immersed in it. And that's authentic to the character of the business. So I think that that's something that I think is really important. And I think I'd also put in an acceptance of diversity of, you know, all of us are different on the outside. You've got gender and race and all of those sorts of things, but the invisible diversity on the inside, and supporting different ways people think, different ways people learn, different ways people feel comfortable in space, the introverts and the extroverts, those on the spectrum and those definitely not on the spectrum. You know, all of those sorts of things are really important in creating an authentic workplace where all of your people will feel comfortable and at home and like they belong. The second thing that I would talk to, so authentic in all of that is one. The second one is, I'll call it soft borders. And what I mean by that is that most organisations deal with other organisations. And whether they're a client or a collaborator, I think many of our organisations are using what both of you just talked about in terms of data and intelligence, and trying to understand, you know, who they're selling to, who they're working with, who they're trying to attract. But using that to create a client-centric experience, and certainly not diminishing the user experience, if we could call it that, because that's almost my first point, is all about the user experience. But the soft borders in terms of breaking down those barriers of how hard is it to engage? How hard is it for you to come and have a meeting with us? How hard is it for you to get a security pass to get in the building? How welcome do you feel? Can you just ask for a coffee, or do you have to wait for some guy, you know, with a silver platter to offer it to you? All of those sorts of things in terms of looking inward and looking outward, maybe is the best way to characterise those 2 points, are absolutely driving what workplaces look and feel like at the moment. And technology and data and insight and strategic intelligence informs all of that. And without those building blocks, the 2 that I spoke about don't really work.
Well, that's a very powerful answer. I like that. I'm going to just break. We've got a couple of questions here. Let's go and just give me a moment. Got one here from Chris Ling. How relevant is it now to consider employees using the spaces as internal customer with a view of assessing and managing their workplace experience? What do we think about that one?
Well, I'll start. Your staff members as customers is a kind of a mindset shift, I'd like to think, in that if we can't get value from our physical premises, then it's going to be questioned about whether we have it at all. And there are only a very few organisations who can afford to work 100% remote. It's a very particular work style. It's a very particular management and leadership style, and it's not going to suit many organisations. And so what you must do is think about why you want to have a workplace, and therefore your customer or your worker needs to be able to feel like they're being listened to in what they're asking for. And the best example I can give you is if you've got 2 organisations that are essentially the same, and one of them offers a hybrid way of working that the employee can feel at home with, that they have autonomy, they have choice, they have dignity, they have a level of ability to curate their own experience in a way that will suit them, versus organisation B that just says, my way or the highway, this is the way we've always done it, deal with it, make yourself fit, square peg, round hole. You can imagine where talent will go in that scenario. And what's it called? The Great Resignation. If you've been reading about that, of people just being so fed up with COVID, and so they're just resigning because that's really the only agency they've got, can't change much else in their lives. That is going to be a massive problem for the attraction and retention of talent over the longer term. I'm seeing it. I'm sure you're all seeing it. I'm sure we've all found people that have moved from one organisation to the other during COVID. And I think treating your staff as customers to be kept happy, which is an entirely different employee-employer contract, to be honest, it's going to turn organisations on their head. But it is really important to recognise that that's a fundamental power shift that's happening right now, if not has happened.
It is. I'll just back that up purely because it's front of mind, because I'm doing a presentation on it for an event. 40% of employees currently considering resigning and finding a new role due to the stress of COVID. 40%. That was a Microsoft survey. So it's massive. It's massive. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal for any organisation. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll just move on to topic 3 then, and this is where we're talking really about, you know, I suppose the design or tech trends in a hybrid landscape, and you know what's going to bridge the gap. We touched on a little bit earlier about what spaces look like, how they're designed, how the technology is sort of integrated into the spaces to bring that experience of remote working and in the office working closer in alignment. So I'm sure that Bex and Domino, you have a lot of experience in this one, but I do want to start with Simon on this first. Simon, what are your thoughts and experience on this one?
Need to revisit the question there again. If you can run over it once more, David.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just wanting to focus on really technology trends and the design in a hybrid landscape. So different types of spaces in a hybrid landscape office, right? How can we bring the experience of remote working and in office working closer in alignment?
Yeah, look,
it's sort of bridge that gap between physical and digital.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think people's first thought is to wonder about what's going to happen with technology and how technology is going to, some huge advancement, maybe it be 5G, virtual reality, all of these different technologies that already exist, how they're going to solve the problem. But ultimately, I think it's people. I think the technology is always going to be supplementary to the human experience. So I'm certainly not an expert on design by any stretch, but I think provided there is a platform created by leadership that can bring people together and provide some sort of value to that interaction, ultimately it's going to lead to productivity and the retention of that talent that you talk about.
So Domino, I know we've talked about this and you alluded to it a little earlier, having different screens in different locations to try and make, that experience of a, in-office meeting space or, collaboration space similar to what we're all experiencing right now, which is, sitting at a desk in front of a screen and a webcam.
Well, it goes to Kathy's question actually, in that the traditional model, let's call it the traditional model of tech on a wall, the narrow wall in the room, faced at a longer table. That kind of worked for a bit, but I think that's because we didn't really know any better. So I think what we're looking to for the future, and there are technologies out there that do this already, is that no matter where you sit, and it may be that you use your own laptop, and so there is becoming an expectation that when you go to an in-person meeting, if you're synchronous thinking, same place, same time, you are synchronous, that you bring your laptop to the meeting room, because you will dial into the virtual room as everybody else is, regardless of whether they're physically present or remotely present. And then everybody will have the same digital environment to engage with. Some people will be next to each other doing that. Some people will be somewhere else doing that. But through the medium of the screen, you will get an equality of experience that's really important. Now, the technologies that take that away from being a laptop experience to being one that's embedded in the room, multiple cameras on the ceiling, the classic donut-shaped table that have cameras looking at you, like in the UN, that kind of scenario, those are sorts of things that we're just starting to dip toes into. Certainly the stand-up tables that have screens for 4 or 6 people to stand around. So 4 people might be present, another 4 people might be from somewhere else that is out in the open. We're seeing little prototypes of those sorts of things kick up. There's lots of interesting ways where that equality of experience is starting to be explored in a really, really good way. But I think it will start to change the typology of meeting room. So I think we'll start to see meeting rooms that have much more immersive wall space dedicated to screens, so that we can see everybody's faces at real scale rather than postage stamp size scale, so that we can read facial expressions and micro expressions. We can recognize if somebody's uncomfortable, so that we can see content equally. And, you know, I'm blind as it is, so, you know, the larger the image, the better, and that we can actually workshop ideas simultaneously, and that be recognizable for people remotely on a Miro board or whatever it might be. So look, I think there's lots of stuff that's happening at the moment. It is early days, but it's a really important conversation to have. And the final piece of that puzzle, and I know we're running out of time, is that we often hear about legacy issues. You know, oh, we're invested in this platform or that platform, or we've got this provider and that provider, and we can't possibly move. To organisations who have people on the call who might be listening, I would say, you're probably not spending any money on transport. Your flight bills are going to be negligible for the next couple of years. The cost of losing people because the experience is no good should really start to be offset to move out of legacy platforms as quickly as you can to prioritise a better experience for your people. And that requires cross-organisational collaboration and a shared commitment to creating better experiences at work. So I can't solve that on my own, though. I wish I could.
Well, we're on 2 o'clock, and I was just going to ask everyone for a last word. I think that's a perfect last word, Domino, unless you've got anything else you wanted to add.
No, I've spoken enough.
Last word for you, Max, on this.
I'll very briefly say that, yeah, to reinforce what's been said, the key here is as a service. So we are talking about agreements you're entering into with service providers that can very quickly be switched on and switched off. People are able to be portable with their services, whatever that might be. And we're seeing that across everything. We're seeing that across devices. We're seeing that across buildings. We're seeing literally everything that we interact with in our daily lives is as a service. And that is critical to how we bridge some of these challenges around being too invested in one platform. The other one I'll say is from a hardware perspective, which we're going to come back to, but the closer alignment with hardware and the platforms that they support and the ecosystems they support is really important. And I'll use one example. Microsoft's view on a meeting is that you're already meeting, you're already collaborating, you're sharing your documents, you've got your OneDrive, your Teams, your this, that, and the other, you're sharing stuff on Excel. The meeting, the face-to-face meeting that you have is just a part of that collaboration process. It is not the meeting, it's a part of the collaboration process. And that is what we're going to see more of. And we're going to see all the technologies and the spaces joined together in this kind of, I guess, this sort of cloud connected view of the world where everything is working together to help us collaborate and meet.
Thanks, Max. Simon, last word.
Look, you know, technology, it's complex. It's always going to be complex. My advice to everyone is go to market, speak to the people that are out there living certain technologies and certainly integrating as much as possible. You know, getting that business intelligence is only going to come through integration and revisiting your operation from a holistic perspective from the top down is certainly going to be the first step towards that, recognising those gaps.
Awesome. Well, I would like to thank you personally very much, Domino, Max, Simon, for attending today. It's been a pleasure having you. Some very insightful words you've shared with everybody, and maybe everyone can just give a virtual round of applause for the panel. I appreciate we're a little bit over time here, and we'll have to wrap it there. But the recording will be available for everybody. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a very enjoyable afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
See you later.